fans are bound to get impatient, but I'm feeling just as bad as them, said Duncan Ferguson in the profile on him in that afternoon's matchday programme, where he would get a rare start against Raith Rovers as Mark Hateley was rested on the bench. Patience was starting to wear a bit thin amongst the loyal Rangers support, not unreasonable after such an excitement around the transfer, but it was his off-field behaviour that was causing as much tension as his lack of on-field substance. One particularly impassioned plea in the February edition of Follow said, really, he has to grow up and stop acting like an overgrown, spoiled 5-year-old. You owe us all a great debt. Start delivering off the park if you cannot deliver on it. This club has much more to offer you than you can give it. Perhaps that fan was one of the thousands cheering his name early in the second half of that match. In retrospect, though, it may have been better for all concerned if he wasn't on the park at all by then. To discuss Dunc and everything else that wraps up season 93-94 Hangover, I'm joined by David Edgar. How are we, David?
I'm good, thank you. Nice to be here and looking forward to maybe a wee under-discussed period in our history coming up for the next couple of seasons. It's almost like we go from 92, 93 straight to, Gaza,
Yeah.
8 in a row, with a slight detour into Laudrup did some things a year before, but let's just go to the title races. So it's nice to maybe cast some light on this.
Indeed. And if David's here, Alan Bradley is also joining us. How are you, Alan?
Yeah, I'm good. And as usual, looking forward to it. As David said, this one's obviously different, certainly compared to 92, 93 in the Heights. But again, no, I think it's always good to just have a wee look back and just maybe kind of drill down more as opposed to just the usual kind of high level. We won this, that, the other, and we jumped on. So, no, looking forward to it, pal, yeah.
You're both looking forward to it, which is interesting. For anyone who is listening to this far in the future, has heard about this wonderful show and finally got around to listen to it. We're recording straight after a pretty dreadful Old Firm defeat. There's not a lot of happiness in this particular show as 93-94 draws to a conclusion. However, there's stuff that we do need to talk about if we have to do this period history. Let's start with Duncan. I'll try and kind of set the scene and get some things in place to tell this story. 35th minute around then, Ferguson's tussling with the Raith Rovers right back, John McStay, he went at the time, cousin of Celtic captain Paul. The corner between the main stand and the Broomloan where Kenny Clark blew for a Raith free kick. Kenny Clark then looked away upfield, presuming that they would stop tussling and Raith would take that free kick pretty quickly and without fuss. That would be a strange and costly assumption to make. McStay appeared to look back in Ferguson, in Ferguson's opinion and words. He began to square up to him, and Duncan got his retaliation in early as he charged forward towards McStay, leaving him on the floor holding his face. I tried to show some aggression, he said. I misjudged my distance and collided with his head. I was clumsy with my head. Words given not in a post-match media debrief or an interview years later, but in a court of law, as Ferguson found himself charged yet again with assault. And it was also a moment that would change his life. If the referee had seen it, or if his standside linesman Jim O'Hare had acted on his initial thoughts, which were, that looked pretty bad, and raised his flag then, perhaps this sense of immediate sporting injustice would have negated the pressure for a different kind. Donna Finlay, vice chairman, of course, at the time, and another side point to this, many people think that Rangers didn't defend Ferguson enough and Finlay should have been involved. Finlay was a witness. He was there at the game. He could not represent Ferguson at that original trial. But in his opinion, an enormous media clamour, no doubt that the police and the fiscal reacted to this. No formal made by McStay or Raith Rovers. It was a Glasgow publican, Dick Barton, who may have started that ball rolling because he sent a letter to every police station in the country demanding action when a policeman said, we can't do anything unless there's a public complaint. David, neither manager made much of the incident in the post-match. Walter Smith missed it. He was doing his normal walk from the main stand down to the dugout from the director's boxes before half-time, as he did every game. But the interviews that both players did, I think, were quite telling. Amplified by the footage, slowed down, zoomed in, that Scott Sport would use the following day. McStay, to be fair, his initial priority is to prove that he wasn't at it. and a cheat and dived and, was just feigning it. He spoke outside on Emerson Drive to the News of the World journalist Kenny MacDonald and a friend of his, pointed to a cut on his lip as proof of contact. And he was speaking to Alan Patullo of the Scotsman now. Great book, In Search of Duncan Ferguson. I would recommend it. And he said, what I think did for him in the court was the club doctor's report. There's a cut above my lip that confirmed. What I found curious at that time, and I still do now, is there's one brilliant picture of the headbutt, and to the side of McStay's head, near his ear. Now, you'd have to be the subject of a Picasso masterpiece for that to do damage to your lips. So that was a bit odd and probably raised, again, the kind of media clamour. Ferguson, very media shy, never really spoke to anyone, but he did speak to the Rangers News and a young Fraser Mackey. He was starting out at the Rangers News at the time, as many football writers do. He later became the sports editor or the chief sports correspondent for the Daily Mail, I think. Having a can of McEwen's lager in his hand, he said, yeah, the boy made a bit of a meal of it, didn't he? Before the two towed the party line and talked only about the game and his joy and pride in scoring his first goal. When the wider press got those quotes, they went wild on it. This juxtaposition. Hope you're proud of me, Dad, was the Sun's headline, saying that the strike overshadowed by the one that left Wraith Ace McStay, such a classic tabloid English, with a burst lip. So in this position then, David, that this simply wasn't fair and the nation demanded action.
Yeah, I mean, it's a more censorious time in some ways, particularly in Scotland, and the media had done that classic thing that they do, which is build up the sort of bad boy image of Duncan Ferguson, and of course he had been in bother previously, as many a young footballer back then was. Not to defend it, you can't go around lamping people in pubs. I think that's fair to say. But it was the accumulation that led to it. But the argument that was put forward that you see this sort of thing happen regularly at football was true, and I think that to deprive a man of his liberty for this was horrendous. I thought that then, and I think it now, and I would have thought it had it been the other way round, incidentally, because it's a bit of argy-bargy on a football field. It's not, it's not a career ender. It's one of these things that we hear a lot. Spitting's the worst thing you can do on a park. Well, no, going over the top onto somebody's knee is the worst thing you can do in a park. I know what I'd rather have happen to me. And I think that the media had built in, and of course he wouldn't talk to the Martyn. So there was a revenge thing there because he was shy and he didn't want to talk to them, which they took as aloofness. And you have to remember the sense of entitlement that the press have, but had then in particular. I mean, I think we talked in this show, didn't we, about Jerry McNee walked up to Graham Souness in the flight from Bucharest and said, my paper spend a lot of money to send me here and you're not giving me info. The fuck's it to Souness what your paper's doing? But that was the attitude, and their attitude was, we'll show him, we'll teach this guy a lesson. That guy, the publican, sounds a right wanker.
Yeah, I know.
If you don't mind me saying, to do that, it should have been left. He should have received a ban for his, afterwards. I don't think anyone would have had a problem with it. But suddenly became a cause celebrity, and everybody could show how upstanding they were, and everybody could show how moral they were. The SFA could show how moral they were. And it was Rangers, and it was Rangers record signing, and he needed taking down a peg or two. I don't understand why. I don't know what he'd done that announced that he had a very high peg, but it was that very Scottish Kent your feather, small time mentality, and they picked on a guy who did clearly have some issues with anger, probably more down to immaturity than anything else. And I think subsequently everyone agrees, it's a very good human being, but it was just too easy. Too many people got too much out of it. People who didn't like Rangers got to have a laugh at Rangers. The press got to revel and look what we did. We got him sent to jail. That'll show him for the crime of, I don't really want to do interviews. And I can't help but feel, and I think on this show we we will always say when a Rangers player has been bang out of order. But I just feel in this instance that, to lose your liberty for this, to go to jail, the horrible experience that is, and the stigma, and the effect on your psyche, and I got the argument at the time of saying, well, it's a pattern of behaviour with him. Well, even so, it wasn't a jailable offence. I'm never keen on justice that's to send a message, because then you're not being treated the same way. If Archie McGlinty wouldn't have been sent to jail for that, and he wouldn't, then Duncan Ferguson shouldn't have been sent to jail for that. The SFA, of course, I'm sure you're going to talk about it, they rush in with a ban immediately. Thus, I thought went against the laws of sub judice, but I know. And it was very much a burn the witch thing. They found that they could get at Rangers, and the actual human being at the end of it, the actual human being who would suffer from it, didn't matter, because that wasn't what it was about. And there was a really horrible element of that in the 90s. And I know that sometimes people will complain about modern people being a bit too soft, and there's certainly things that will annoy me when it goes to ridiculous length, but I like the fact that as a society we maybe now would certainly at least put the argument forward, well, really, do we need to do this? Is this a use of resources? Well, we would in most countries. We still see in Scotland that Rangers can be a very useful political football, so to speak. So, yeah, I remember feeling very angry at the time. I felt for him. And obviously there was that sense of, I want to see him on the park scoring goals, So there's that very myopic, immature selfishness on my part. But even just on a basic human level, I just thought they're sending him to jail because he ran up and dipped his head towards a defender. And the lie, for it was a lie about the burst lip, he's a centre half. You get them still in games. I thought that just made it worse. And I accept that McStay didn't press a charge, or didn't go out and campaign for him to be pilloried nonetheless, but this whole thing, I think, is an absolute stain on Scottish football. I really do.
Yeah, Alan, I'm in the Govan rear, so the other end of the ground, I guess, the other side of the pitch anyway, and it looked like one of those kind of coming together. I couldn't really see. Ferguson's definitely made that movement, and listen, no defending the movement. It is a headbutt. It's no the one where you kind of lift the head back and spring forward. It's more like kind of rhino charge, really. But it's ridiculous. It's stupid. It's a red card for sure. But it didn't look like much from where I was. Nothing happens. He goes on and scores. My intro to this 93-94 segment a few weeks ago mentioned Jim White. And being very excited in the Scott Sports studio because they had this huge story, and he was like a kid at Christmas. I know that because I was there. I was doing work experience on that Sunday, and what a weekend to choose, I guess. But he was excited. He was listen. He's a media man, and that's how they make their living. And it was a big story. It was missed. Can you remember? We'll get to the legal bit in a minute, but the game and the incident itself, and that week after, because this is unjust, and he should have been sent off. It was a bad mistake by Kenny Clark. You get two players with their arms over each other, just blowing for a free kick and then carrying on as if that isn't going to, there's not even a threat or a danger of there being any kind of afters. For an experienced referee is bizarre. But I mean, the week after that was pretty hyped.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the game, and I think what David said, and you'd be the same. We were all wanting Ferguson. I don't know, since we signed him, come on, we want him to kind of come good and
waiting,
so on.
Didn't you? You kept right here. Now. Yeah.
And this guy definitely was the hottest property in Scottish football, and even at the time, breaking into the international team and so on. So I think people tend to forget that as well. But this guy was going to potentially for the next 10 years be, one of the best, kind of players that we have in Scotland. So yeah, I can remember. I think David Robertson scored a really good kind of first goal and so on. Got a second one. Obviously, big Ferguson got the one in the second half, and then maybe Miko at the end. But I was East Enclosure. I remember something happening down in the left, and it's here we go. But again, as you say, you saw this all the time. It was like is it handbags? Has he actually put the head on him? Is the boy going down? But I think, as you said, then you go away from the game, you didn't think anything of it. You thought, that's brilliant. Ferguson scored. Now we're kind of talking. We'll see. And the way it built up, and I think what got me too was, for you guys too, I don't know, and I know I don't condone violence now, so on the record can't do it, but the amount of fights I get in and the amount of trouble I get in playing football all the time, we all did it, whether it was just in a local park in big games. You saw it every week down in England, down here, and I just couldn't get that in my head at all. And I know what the guy did. I think there was an assault of someone in a taxi ranks, problem in the pub as well, wasn't there? And all these other ones. But to me, I just put this more as an incident that happened on the football park. And if you think of, I saw it with Willie Johnson, the amount of red cards that he got, somebody that, descending off, but again, he would get suspended. Big Steen, at one point, they actually managed to ban him in the run-up to the league, where in effect we ended up losing at the end and he couldn't play in the cup final. So these things were going on, but I just saw it as a football thing. And I think it just says so much. I would have thought nowadays, but for, as you say, like a publican to then write to police stations, and because I feel because it's Rangers as well, because it's the kind of big one, and I take your point, the media, this is a great story, but I think it's just disgraceful because they could have banned the guy for, I don't know, so many games and so on, whatever, but just using what had happened elsewhere outside of the football one, such a shame, really. Yeah,
I've always felt it's a dangerous route. Yeah, I've always felt it's a dangerous route to go down. Incidentally, about criminalising things that happen.
Yeah,
and because, and I think it was in FF at the time, Martyn, maybe not, maybe one of the other fanzines, where somebody said, what's worse, that or what happened to Ian Durrant? So why is Neil Simpson not getting done? Because Neil Simpson deliberately tried to hurt somebody. He committed an act of assault where he was trying to cause an injury. Ferguson wasn't. He's lost his temper. And we'd all seen,
punch-ups. Tackles and things in the 70s, and they just went on in football parks.
Craig Levine breaking Graham Hogg's jaw.
Well, that's the thing, right? So, just a side note on the Dick Barton, the publican, he very quickly felt very guilty and withdrew his complaint, obviously too late. Right, yeah. He actually campaigned outside the court for Duncan, so he's maybe an eccentric character. 3 weeks later, Ferguson gets banned for 12 games by the SFA. David, you're right. There's issues of prejudice and a trial there. That's what Rangers complained about. They effectively tried to avoid that hearing for those reasons, but the SFA forced their hand. Rangers appealed immediately. That's why Ferguson could play at the end of that season. Now, if the wider media pressure gets the fiscal involved in a sporting matter, then when it was eventually heard, it's not eventually heard till May 1995, at which point Duncan Ferguson is an FA Cup winner for Everton, not even a Rangers player anymore. Yeah. Then again, the context didn't help him. 94-95 was a pretty bad season in England, actually, in English football. Match fixing allegations, transfer bungs, sleaze, racism, and then on, of course, the 25th of January, the kind of ultimate barometer when Cantona leapt into the crowd at Selhurst Park. Now, he was given a custodial sentence initially. It was appealed, and community service was the outcome there. But I guess what you could say is that was a member of the public that got attacked, and that maybe there's the lines are broken there. Violence in the football field is nothing new, and that's what Ferguson's lawyers tried to use. There was a OVD Junior Cup final at Ibrox not long before the trial. Glenafton and
I was at this.
Yeah, Lags. Multiple incidents of violence, punches and a headbutt again.
Headbutts.
Typical Ayrshire, Martyn.
It was an absolute Ayrshire Western Juniors that. But one guy, and it wasn't a Duncan Ferguson style headbutt. One of the boys, Big Ali, something he used to play for Motherwell, runs up and sinks the nut.
Brutal.
And I mean, it reminds me, actually, I went to see Co-winning Rangers versus Largs Thistle in the semi-final in 99, the year the Buffs won it. And
Jeez, oh, yeah.
the Co-winning Rangers fullback was sent off after 3 minutes for nutting the linesman, and had the audacity after headbutting the linesman to say, what? But yeah, look, it was. And it was a farce. And the Cantona one got reduced, Martyn, because the appeal said he did not get a sentence commensurate. He got a sentence based on being
it was
Eric Cantona.
because of who he was. Yeah, and the other one that Rangers used, you've referenced it already, David, was in the August of 1994 pre-season between Hearts and Wraith Rovers. Who was on the bench for Wraith Rovers that day? John Mustay. Where Graham Hogg and Craig Levein, both Hearts players, got into a fight about a chance. It wasn't even a goal, I don't think. And they get into a fight, and Levein broke Graham Hogg's jaw with a left hook. And that was, again, used to present nothing. No one was called. The first goal was not involved in that. The sheriff for Ferguson's case, Sandy Eccles, said the examples were irrelevant because they took place in play and immediately from continuing play, unlike the present case, except that it did. The Ferguson case was exactly the same, where the match was stopped immediately before the incident arose and the damage a lot less severe. Eccles spoke to Pichulo in that book. He said, looking at the TV film of it, it didn't look as if it was done in the heat of the moment, which suggests some kind of premeditation on Ferguson's part for an act that preceded a tussle that occurred literally seconds before it. So that was a bit of a farce. But given that Ferguson had 3 previous convictions for assault, and by that time 1 for drink driving, if and when he was found guilty, I don't think a custodial sentence was unfair or unexpected. It wasn't about the headbutt and Jock McStay.
No, it wasn't.
He was going to get done. But whether it should have got there, whether this should have brought him to court, is what rankled with a lot of Rangers fans at the time. Finlay is of the impression that Ferguson was a sacrificial lamb at a time where public pressure for footballers to be held to the same standard as the man in the street was pretty high. He quoted from Voltaire's Candide. I will not do the French original, but it's good to kill an admiral from time to time in order to encourage the others, and that's really it. It was
pour Enclosure l'autre.
Yeah, indeed.
That's what it is.
I think this did change Ferguson's life and changed his career, of course. It's maybe tempting, and we've got to guard against, even though it's narratively seductive all the time, to look at turning points and say, everything spins on a coin. I think it would have happened. If it wasn't in a pitch, it would have been in a pub. He was heading towards that result just because of the kind of character he was in this constant frustration. But it did happen that day, and after Wraith, really the end for Ferguson at Ibrox was nigh. Boys, still business to take care of as this exhausting season limped to a close. Fittingly, Dundee United would turn up to Ibrox the next week for a Scottish Cup final dress rehearsal. Again, the week dominated by the man who had left United for Rangers last summer. If you look at the result and you kind of quickly glance at it, business as usual. 2-1 home win, 2 more important goals for Gordon Durie, Rangers cruising to title number 6. However, there was more to it than that. United took an early second half lead. Christian Daly converted a Jerry Nixon cutback, and they should have had the opportunity to make it 2. Daly completely taken out by Dave McPherson in the box only a couple of minutes later. Referee John McCluskey waved play on, and Rangers capitalise with the 2 headers by Durie, taking his tally to 12 in 20 league games. Again, I would stress his importance to this season. Ivan Golak was not happy. He opted for sarcasm as a defence. I understand completely the decision. The referee was 4 or 5 yards away and in line with what happened. Yes, a very difficult decision to make in those circumstances. I think he'd been riled by Walter Smith, who said, at least United had played when they came to Ibrox early in the season, won 3-0. If they don't put men up the park, they lose. And Golak was pointed in his responses. I read that Walter Smith had not seen the Duncan Ferguson incident because he was on his way down from the stand. If he thinks we didn't play well, he must have been in the tunnel. If we'd scored a second goal with a penalty, there's nothing Rangers could have done to change things. Our players are angry and even more determined to win the cup final. That's how I want it to be. We will emerge stronger as a result from this. Well, they would. No one inside Ibrox could have possibly known, David, that Rangers were just about to, or Rangers had spent, and we'd witnessed the last victory of the season on the 23rd of April. the chance to seal the championship at Fir Park on the Tuesday. Passed up, Motherwell 1-2-1 for the second time that season, ended a 22-game unbeaten run, and on it went until the following Saturday, where the title could be won if other results went Rangers' way, at home to Celtic. However, it would be an Old Firm game with a very, very different atmosphere. Okay, before we get to the game, this goes back, of course, to the Halloween win, or the day before Halloween, where, listen, damage done at grounds, it's hard to damage Parkhead in those days. I can't stress that enough. Scud missile, £1 million worth of improvements, etc., etc. But on that game, there were more than 800 seats damaged or ripped out. And Rangers complained more vigorously than they'd ever done. Celtic responded in a way that set in motion this chain of events that led to, I guess, unprecedented action. They were not prepared to pay for the damage. Because the understanding was it happens at both grounds. It's the home team's job to police and steward and just ensure safety. But this was excessive. Tom Grant, one of the directors at the time, denied any malicious intent. He blamed the damage on exuberant fans celebrating that late victory, or them trying to avoid queues by climbing over seats. That he said there's not a lot of space that these seats have. He wouldn't know much about that right enough, given the state of Parkhead. But given that both Kilmarnock and Motherwell had taken big supports at the Broomloan Road and had won late on and had not got anywhere near the same kind of damage, never mind even getting into the toilets and the state of those, Rangers were in no mood to accept excuses. So this dragged on over the months, and then end of January, Murray announces they're banned. They're not getting any tickets for the game on April 30th. Now, the reaction to that is predictably extreme. If you look at Follow, one of the most notoriously cynical contributors, I'll leave you to wonder who. David Murray has me feeling 10 foot tall at the moment. Thank you for sticking by the Rangers fans and their club. Mark Dingwall's editorial was entitled "Stand by Our Man." Thank you, David Murray, for finally burying the myth that anyone needs a strong Celtic. Stand firm, in capitals. The main football writers, Alex Cameron, Alan Davidson, Ian Archer, were at the forefront saying it would just denigrate the greatest derby in the world, one that pulled scorn over for its unsavoury elements for years. Davidson went further, said that Rangers are nothing without Celtic. And we kind of talked about this last week, the importance of a strong Celtic, and Jerry McNee's campaign to get that all sorted. But this was a huge media reaction, as you'd imagine. By the time of the game comes, David Fergus McCann's in place, and he made a peace offer to Murray privately, which he then made public in the week before the game, stating that neither. It was rebuffed, and neither he or the directors were going to attend. If we're not welcome, if fans not welcome, we're not welcome. We'll have the reserve game on. We'll be at that. Rangers fans are welcome at that. His offer was extra money on the tickets for Celtic fans, only when they provided names and addresses. Promised to pay for any damage, an independent inspection before and after the game. Any steward and policing required, they'd pay it. But a refusal to pay for the previous damage, and Murray was unmoved, as McCann would have known that he would be.
Correct.
But acute use of the media there, David, in a game where Rangers could win a title against Celtic, should have been an early sign for Murray that he was facing a very different opponent in the boardroom.
Correct. There was a story round about then about McCann that when Celtic were building the first half of the Breeze Block Boulevard, some people came and say, "Oh, we can't get TV reception. You need to compensate as locals." And he said, "Okay, bring your TV license." And very few people did. So that, this is a guy who thinks on that level about saving money. So he was not going to pay for the damage to the seats because it didn't happen in his watch. But he knew, Murray couldn't have anyway. See, if Celtic had come out all sweetness and light, Murray probably couldn't anyway because he'd said, "I'm going to do this." And this is maybe a wee bit of surprise. We're not the most logical people when it comes to our opponents from that side of the city. They don't like us very much, and we're not all that keen on them. So had he done it, I'd have been, personally apoplectic. I think most of the Rangers fans were, nope, you need to learn your lesson here. But it was very clever. It was well worked. You get this, bullshit about, we need a strong Celtic throughout the 90s. We never got it. I think during the 2010s that we needed a strong Rangers. In fact, we got told the exact opposite. That it simply wasn't the case. But you know, I do get it. I think, look, firstly, I think we would all agree anybody breaking a seat at a football match is a bit of a dick. You know, there's no excuse to do that. You don't have the right to do that. I'm sorry, it really is that simple. It does happen, and generally speaking, the clubs just pay it. Celtic at that era, the reason they didn't pay it is they couldn't.
Yeah.
They literally did not have the money to do it. So there was no danger they were going to pay for those seats because they couldn't afford that. Whereas, you know, it still happens, unfortunately, for all clubs, including ours. And the clubs just quietly pay the bill and move on. So it will never go away because you get, you know, alcohol and quite often testosterone. Apologies to our female listeners who like to rip out seats when they're at the football. But it'll always happen, unfortunately. You get that sort of stupid petty vandalism. But yeah, this kind of, as you say, Martyn, the hypocrisy of, oh, you're damaging, you know, it was very kind of Wither Alba. Oh, they're damaging the greatest derby in the world. Hold on, you said this derby was just full of sectarian bile and evil. You couldn't take any. So what is it? You know, it's one or the other, surely. And a large part of it, you know, if Celtic had banned Rangers fans, would Ian Archer have complained? No, of course he wouldn't have. It was entirely because it was them, and they thought this was unfair, and they thought again it was, you know, Rangers. Anything Rangers did round about this period would always be viewed in the context of they're throwing their weight about, and people don't like when someone they consider to be that they don't like and they consider to be more successful than they want them to be throws their weight around, and everything Rangers did was viewed through that prism. Of the journalists you mentioned there, two of them, and this is not in any way a dig, I mean, I'm certainly the last person to be able to do it. Two of them had severe problems with alcohol, and it affected their outputs quite radically. Both of them, but they actually pass away before they should have, if you like, because of their issues with the drink. And you would get these articles where it almost seemed from week to week that the same person hadn't written them. And unfortunately, I believe that quite often was the case due to these, you know, it was seen as that industry, wasn't it, back then? You know,
absolutely. That's where, that's where stories were found in the pub.
Yeah, you went to the boozer and you get stuck in, and there was, you know, definite issues with those particular journalists there. Who would do that. And then also, look, we know in Scottish football, the amount of journalists who love to publicly have their hands wringing, while in reality they've got their hands wringing another part of their anatomy about this sort of thing, where it's publicly, it's immorality, and privately it's like, this is magic, I've got 3 weeks of stories out of this. And this was its very flabbiest, worst example.
On the whole narrative and the kind of journalists and so on, all the way, I mean, young ones, I would imagine younger bears, I'll be familiar with people talking about Murray, you know, at the time where he kind of controlled, and obviously in the past 10, 15 years, I mean, it's gone completely the other way. But I think even through the 60s, you know, the narrative later on, you know, Jock Stein, he's so super, he's a tracksuit manager, as you say, Geir Henderson, Archer, the lot of them. And even during this time when Celtic were a laughingstock, things obviously did get up to the surface. But again, as you said, there's a whole, half a dozen of them who were continually, like the Jerry McNee one, as if I'm campaigning for it and so on. And that even at this point in time, this seems to be here. But did you think, David, as well, that the way Fergus McCann had come in now and Celtic were beginning to just tip the balance a wee bit now, or, you know, controlling the media, you know?
No, well, you know, being a Rangers fan who read FF, I just thought the media were
always sort of,
of course, everybody does, don't they? I mean, I was listening in to a phone in the other week where somebody was going on about the anti-Norwich media. And you're like, hey, right, nobody has ever given a second.
I don't even know a tractor.
Yeah, exactly. So there was an element. No, I mean, I Celtic had been a comedy club for so long. It was going to take a long, long time. I was going to need much more evidence of it. To me, I thought it was just them being sneaky. I admit that I am predisposed to thinking ill of them and their motives. I don't think it was a genuine good faith offer, as Martyn touched upon. If it was, he would have quietly just said, we'll pay for the seats, we'll do this sort of bond thing that he said with the extra on the tickets that can be held against it, all that kind of stuff. He didn't do it. He knew what the deal breaker was, and he knew he could offer what he could offer up to without it being accepted. And it was clever because he had that kind of mind. And then it's interesting actually because McCann does play the media so well at this point, but see, once he's in, I mean, his relationship with the Scottish media was
it just plummets, doesn't it?
Because he as happens with a lot of people, Murray would enjoyed it. A lot of kind of successful businessmen don't like being questioned. I mean, Murray didn't like being questioned, but the journalists didn't question him, so that was easy enough. But with McCann, I genuinely think he came in, as a lot of people have done at Scottish football, met the press back and thought, these guys are all morons. And why do I have to kowtow to them? And if you're a very successful person, having to kowtow to, with all due respect, the likes of Alan Davison and Ian Archer, you're not going to do it.
The game itself, perhaps if Rangers had scored early, it would have been a very different game, but they couldn't, and it was a strange kind of flat atmosphere despite the balloons and streamers, made flatter even more by John Collins' free kick that gave Colin Scott, who was in for Ali Maxwell, absolutely no chance, and alerted stewards to Celtic fans who had somehow managed to secure a ticket. We huffed and we puffed and eventually got an equaliser. Miko's deflected shot spun over Bonner into the net later on. Even then, there was no late charge, really, to finish the game off in style. There was very little left in the tank, if we're being honest. And some pundits suggested the Rangers were choking. This prospect of a historic double treble in front of them, tantalisingly in reach. Stuart McCall said, losing our nerve, us, not a chance of that happening immediately after the game. And he's probably right, not nerve. This is a side who come through tougher tests than this. But energy, almost certainly. Rangers celebrated their sixth successive title at Easter Road on Tuesday the 3rd of May. With a 1-0 defeat and with the league not technically being won at all. It was conceivable for Rangers to stumble to defeat in those final two games. In the end, they lost 1-0 to Killie and drew 0-0 with Dundee, but it was fairly unlikely that Motherwell were going to claw back a goal difference of 18. So even Walter allowed his side to have an early celebration. Injury and illness kept Jury and Duncan Ferguson out, and Hibs' goal came from a defensive error by Richard Gough, almost the perfect way in which to seal the 93-94 triumph. An understrength, error-strewn defeat on the same night that their closest rival lost, as the country shrugged at yet another league flag being hoisted above Ibrox Stadium. And yet Smith, in his autobiography later that year in 1994, says he was very proud of that triumph. He said, that title gave me more satisfaction than any of the other trophy wins that we have had. It was a long, hard slog for these players. And that kind of endurance test, he says, for them to have taken the title once more after all the early season problems and lingering worries, which it is, was amazing. You won't find me criticising them because at times they didn't show the same style as they had the previous season. Winning last year asked for different qualities from the players. It wasn't just about their footballing ability, it was about their physical and emotional reserves that they had left to draw on. Alan, I don't think Walter's been disingenuous there. I think he genuinely is proud of this one. He's kind of protective of his squad and their achievements, but this was a different kind. It wasn't dramatic and sensational like some of the others, but sometimes you need to grind it out.
Absolutely, Martyn. And the thing is, even 91, 92, there was about half a dozen players played, 50 odd games, 55 games. 92, 93, obviously the whole domestic and the European ones too. So it wasn't even a case of just kind of getting to the finish line on this season. To me, it was just the extension of, the previous couple of years. And I think the point that you made with, I think, John and Andy in the first episode was, really we should have been strengthening beforehand. We were unlucky in terms of injuries and so on. But again, that's because it was just constant.
Yeah.
The players were done in the end. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've briefly mentioned this before. I think we'll talk about it.
You don't think we were struggling with injuries, no?
I don't think we were lucky. I don't think we were unlucky, sorry, that we were struggling with injuries. I think those injuries were, or should have been predictable, given how those...
Sorry, well,
season...
unfortunate rather than unlucky, but what I mean is it was just I would say the kind of result of those couple of years of... That's all, the whole physical. Yeah, they were knackered, basically. Yeah.
Well, it was a result of those 2 years of absolute flat-out performance.
Yeah.
And secondly, a result of a disgracefully unprofessional team off the pitch.
And the bottom line...
unfortunate leg breaks or collisions or contact injury. This was muscle injury after muscle injury. We're not training properly, we're not living properly, and we will come to one of the best examples of that at the end. Davey, I wasn't Easter Road that night. I think I was listening to the radio, but it was a shrug.
Yeah, I mean, it was. The season just petered out, didn't it? It just sort of dribbled to a conclusion, and there was this sort of... It was just a deeply unsatisfying season all in, really, wasn't it? There was so few highlights, and
even the last game, David, isn't it? It was just you're going there to pick it up, and it's like
it was. And I'm getting to that age now where, for the first time, it's hurry up and pick, so I can go get pissed, and because I'm not a wee boy anymore. I can go and I'm going for a bevy after it, basically. So it's pick up that silver thing, wave it at me, and let me go and go and get a drink and sing songs. There was just this sort of grey sense around that whole season, and the players looked knackered, and as you say, the football had been atrocious, and every game kind of felt like a slog at this point. You weren't getting rip roaring entertainment, I think it's fair to say. So yeah, the season probably ended, Martyn, in the most opposite way that it
was perfect. It was absolutely perfect. And this the two generational approaches that we've maintained all the way through these shows. I had that in my mind when I was thinking back to that 0-0 final league game at Ibrox against Dundee, final league game of the season. There's one thing I just want to say on that. I said to my dad that day, I'm 13? I said, this is boring. Winning the title, this is boring. He kind of looked at me.
Oh, wait a minute, son. Yeah.
He'd been through, because I don't know, as we've talked about, I don't know famine.
So basically,
absolutely, but this is the football shit, and this
so
is
basically
boring.
What you're saying, Martyn, is that karma booting us in the balls so severely was entirely down to you. I mean,
and I was not alone, because it was
you were. I was the same.
I was like flattest atmosphere, and
hey, we've won the league again.
Exactly. We had our live show, and one of the questions I wanted to talk about was the impact of the television window being wide open now, and you're seeing regular football that does not look like this. Alan, there's only one other thing about that 0-0 game, the final league game of the season, I wanted to ask you about.
I wasn't on the part, Martyn.
No one was on the part. No one cared.
No, I wasn't.
Final stand for the Enclosures. That was them. And they would be seated over the season. It was coming, of course, from the Taylor report. Followed a kind of brief, half-hearted campaign to save them. Like, you don't need the whole thing to be seated completely. Surely this is a modern state-of-the-art stadium. It was the heartbeat of the support. Can we retain that? But it was never going to happen.
No, I mean, we at one point, obviously up with you guys, the posh guys, I think we had a £160 Premier Club when it first opened. So as soon as he's, it's second year or something, maybe, or, the year after it, before that with the Rover thingies. But I remember, and then it went up again in price, and we got I think it was 90 quid East Enclosure, that'll do us. So we immediately went down. So we were in the East Enclosure, and I remember, you'll get onto it next season, but the Man United game, if I'm right, and what they did is they actually gave us a seat, and I was in the front row. Now that was shite, because looking at the camber of the pitch, you couldn't even see below anyone's knee at the other side. And I remember going into the ticket office on the Monday and going, there you are, there's my ticket back. And they went, what? And I said, I'm not taking that. How not? I said, well, apart from the rain, I said, you can't see the full game, or you just need to. I said, would David Murray go to the theatre and just only see 70% of it? And eventually the lassie put the thing up on the screen and went, blah, 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 what about there? And I moved. But yeah, that was a biggie. I mean, I loved the Enclosure. And I know we've got to move on and so on for all the reasons, but
it was a real rest on the heart for a lot of fans.
But Martyn, even before that, Martyn, the Derry where I was, obviously younger, was the old covered terrace and the Sandy Jardine one. But then behind that goal used to be it, and then obviously then when that's why a lot of them moved to the East Enclosure. But you're right, it was a heartbeat, and you've got obviously nowadays you've got your Union Bears doing all the stuff, but the East Enclosure for me that was the place.
Yeah, my first time in there was 1986. You remember we beat Hearts 3-0 at Ibrox. David Cooper was, no, it was in 86, 87, but it was in 86. It was winter. Okay. We beat them 3-0. Henry Smith had one of his classic goalkeeping performances, and a young all the young bears, you'll remember this, Alan. We used to go down the front and kick about the empty cans.
That's right.
Once you're 8, 9, you're getting a wee bit bored. So you would meet people, in my first time in there, a boy asked me if I was a Catholic or a prostitute. And to this day, I can honestly answer I'm certainly not a Catholic.
It was the Charles see the Charles and Di Rosettes and all that when they scored. There was always all that stuff on it. It was brilliant.
And as I say, I don't remember them selling tins of McEwen's Export at the game, but somehow you could always get a game of headbutt down the front of the enclosure as a wee boy with them. So goodness knows where they came from. But yeah, I mean, it was special. But again, any sort of campaign for traditional stuff, you had to, but also any sort of campaign for traditional stuff, Martyn, as you say, half-hearted, because it didn't really fit with who we saw ourselves as. We saw ourselves as modern, go-ahead, dynamic, at the forefront. We it was a time where, if Murray had said, maybe we should paint the front of this, this red brick thing red, why don't we paint it blue? Folk would have went along with it. Now, people try and touch anything that's a tradition. We piss all over it loudly and instantly. But back then there was, that kind of sense. You would get your traditionalists and you would get but it was more sort of wistful, things have changed, not angry, things must not change.
If they had have given us the choice, I think at that time we would all just have went, nah, forget that, but as you say, it was coming, wasn't it? And,
Okay, coming also was the Scottish Cup final, the chance of a double treble, never been done before. And yes, it had been a grind, but the League Cup, which was superb. We had the key league games at Parkhead New Year, Aberdeen at Ibrox in December, twice against Motherwell in December and March, where the side could turn it on when required and just get the big wins. And it was just assumed that we would do. Follow, as we come to the end of another treble winning season, no one really expects the Teddies to let the Arabs finally win something, do they? The standard of football on display has been awful, and it's just, everyone says another treble winning season in sight. It's just assumed. Two themes of the season wrapped up in one complacent line, really. Rangers were well below their best. Comes to the silverware, one strong assumption that this machine would just grind up anyone in its path. As it turned out, sadly, those exceptions were brief highlights and not the rule. Watching this game back, there was no lack of effort, actually, in the game. Just energy, just class. Rangers dominate the game, especially the second half. However, the creative responsibility just lands on too few, mainly Miko, really, in the later stages. Even Hateley just looked like a ghost, back to power. Golak had named his team the day before, with Smith still sweating on a few players, and he said, look, we'll attack Rangers in their weaknesses. I'll play 3 up front, stretch their defence, but I hope others in my team will also get forward. I want to attack with 6 and 7 players rather than defend with that number. We're all confident and believe there's no reason why we can't go to Hampden and win the Cup. In truth, they were far more reactive, actually, than proactive, but they would be dangerous when they pressed, and that would ultimately bring the reward. Rangers unlucky to have a McPherson header cleared off the line, but fortunate not to concede a penalty. I think when Ian Ferguson knocked Alec Cleland off balance in the box, this was all in the opening 10 minutes. In the end, however, the main takeaways, all too familiar. Injuries, of course. Trevor Stephen, who had been at the heart of that kind of revival in the league, didn't make it. Gary Stevens went off after 25 minutes, and that was really him. Selection issues, tick. Smith gambled on some McCoist magic in the cup final once more, but he looked miles off the pace. The ball just refused to stick, and the Rangers manager ended the season exactly the same way he had proposed to start it before being forced to ditch it, with both Hateley and Ferguson up front. Combination didn't work that day either. Mistakes? Well, the biggest of the season, and no prizes for guessing who was involved. Dave McPherson was a late doubt, just past fit, and actually, weirdly, probably the best Rangers player over the course of the 90 minutes. Just a minute after the restart, he has a choice to make. Craig Brewster flicks on a long United ball into his path. Now, seconds earlier, he'd seen Andy McLaren press Neil Murray over on the right-hand touchline. And with Christian Daly chasing him down, he opted not to give Murray another test so quickly and instead make the short pass back to Ali Maxwell. In this instance, actually, Murray's in a lot more space. McPherson's looking that way as he takes the ball. It looks like that's what he's going to do. He has this last second change of heart. He changes shape, goes the other way, putting the keeper under more pressure than he would have ever done with Murray. Maxwell was one of these keepers that was just struggling with this pass-back loss. He's now 2 years in place. And where others maybe would have controlled the ball, maybe feinted right and then go left and pass it out to David Robertson and start something else, he just decided to blast it and kick it as hard as he could. Mm-hmm. Sadly, that went straight into the onrushing Daly. Now, for a brief second, he appeared to have smothered the danger. He got on top of the ball, but it didn't last long. Daly regained possession. He tried his luck from a very narrow angle. He's quite unlucky, actually. It hits the post, spins back into the path of the onrushing Brewster, who had sensed the danger long before, and he won the cup from 2 yards out. I was there. Alan, you were there. I presume, Davey, you were there as well. Again, Davey, I just assumed we would win because that's what we do. But I didn't really fancy us once that goal went in. I don't know how you remember that game.
I fucking hate wearing a new strip in a cup final, and it's because of this. And as soon as that goal went in, I knew we weren't winning because it was one of those.
So it was your fault? Yeah.
No, it was their fault. You don't wear a new strip in a big game. And I know people are going to say, oh, what about 95, 96?
And 92 as well, everyone.
Yeah, well, even so, I still hate it, and it's because of this. And I didn't like that strip. It's one of my favourites now, but for the longest time, I didn't like that strip, and it was purely because of this. It was probably fitting, really. As you say, Martin, it wasn't a lack of effort. They were huffing and puffing.
No, they were.
Jesus, there was nothing going on at all. And I remember seeing a really interesting interview with Eamon Bannon just after this, and he was asked about Ivan Golac, and he was a bit eccentric and had a propensity to talk pish at times, right? 20 million Jared Nixon, for example. But he said, the thing with Jim McLean, people used to say, why do you never win a cup final? And he said, because when it got tight in these matches, the boys would look round. He said you would see the Rangers players get 10% extra for Walter Smith, or you would see, the Aberdeen players before that get 10% off Alex Ferguson. We turned around and see wee Jim, who we respected, but we didn't like, and you just don't. He said, whereas the United players, they liked Golac, and he'd kept them nice and relaxed, and he'd used that week before, as you say, the kind of injustice of it, because it was a penalty, by the way, 100%. And the Rangers players they're trying, aren't they? They're trying to jam these kind of square. I was going to say square balls into round holes, but I don't think that fits. But they were just, nothing was coming off, and they're looking at each other, and I think just saying, it's no the other day, and we'll keep going, and inevitably if we get the first goal, it's very similar. Do you remember the week after Dunfermline 6-1 at Ibrox, actual helicopter Sunday?
Yeah, the final.
Dundee. They hit the post just before. We're fucking awful. Had that gone in, I don't think we're coming back that day. No. In all honesty, right? And it was that turn. If that hits the post and goes out, then we probably
we'll be fine.
Knowing us, we probably would. A set piece or something. We'd have got there, but
because as time goes on.
It didn't feel
campaigns
like
have that mentality, don't they? It's still 0-0.
And they begin to think that.
Yeah, exactly.
Once they got that goal, they all got, it was like it was like a rocket up their arse after that. And I don't mean that they needed it. I just mean that after that, the Dundee United players were,
Possessed.
men possessed, because they knew. And I think
can hold on.
there's a type of goal you can lose when there's already this kind of, as we've mentioned, this sort of dreary feeling around the end of the season, and it's a dreary game, and then you lose a really shitty goal like that, and you just say, this is. And they thought, very rarely have I been at a cup final. I'll tell you, the next time I actually felt the same feeling, it was the League Cup final when Alfie missed the penalty.
Yeah.
And I just went, we could play another 3 weeks here. We're not scoring a goal a day. And it was that sense of, and you know me, I'm normally optimistic, but I just, in my heart, I was like, nah, that's the type of goal that you concede when it's not your day. And in the end, I don't think we can claim we were unlucky.
No, we definitely will not.
Sure,
I walked away though still. How couldn't we have? Because I obviously had the chance of seeing the other back-to-back trebles, and we failed in the Monday at Parkhead, the 4-2 thingy, and then we be Greg. So I had in my mind, well, we're going for the double treble now, and we had played Dundee United. This would be their 7th Scottish Cup final. We had played them Scottish Cup quarter-finals, Scottish Cup final, League Cup finals, and so on, beat them all the time. They basically, every time we played them at Hampden, and as I say, I just had in my mind, it's Dundee United. But as you say, once that goal went in, but even all the way through the second half, as you say, the amount of possession we had, but just the time went on, and it was, as you say, it just, I don't know, it just had some kind of strange feeling. And because I was quite near them, I was maybe, I don't know, about 10, 15 yards away from their side. And as you say, I think their fans get the big lift as well. And it's as if suddenly, I think I mentioned to you guys too, were they singing that Beautiful Sunday in that game, or was that a later Dundee United game we played them? But I seem to have a kind of memory of that. And then just the time ticking away, and it's just not really getting anything out of it.
The one I remember them singing, they could have done. I'm not. But the one I remember them singing that day was "Can't Help Falling in Love with You." The song, which I always thought was a really weird song for a football song, and I'd never heard it before at a football match that I could recall, and that kind of sticks out with me for what they were singing that day. But yeah, it was just, and you're kind of filing it, and of course, do you know that people were angry coming out, but there wasn't that. It wasn't that insane anger. It was that almost like,
it's like 7 out of 8 kind of frustration, isn't it?
It was sort of like, I can't believe we've no won that. It was more embarrassment, really, wasn't it? Because we didn't lose cup finals to the likes of Dundee United, and I just tended to think that Rangers, if we got to a cup final, forget it, job done.
Yeah, especially against them.
I mean, they'd never won the cup, and they'd famously, what was it, 5? They'd lost under Jim McLean, 5 Scottish Cup finals.
6, I think.
This was their 7th final. They'd lost 6 finals, David, during the time, but this was their 7th now.
2016, the run up to that Hibs final, this was in my mind constantly about a league, a season that had finished weeks ago.
Yeah.
We hadn't won, and it's like, you can't just pick it up. And so just very quickly, I want you to give me a percentage of culpability for both McPherson and Ali Maxwell. Start with you, Alan.
Probably more Ali Maxwell than Big Bambi, but probably 60-40 for him. Although, funnily enough, later on in the game, he does the same again. He blasts the ball off a Dundee United player. Too, doesn't he? Yeah.
I remember that did raise in all the ennui. I remember that did raise for certainly the bit of stadium I was in, folk were going mental.
Again, think of the history here. It's not the first time this season. Your percentage?
I would say, I would agree with Alan that on the actual instance, probably 60-40, but I'm going to go 50-50 because purely Dave should have known better.
Just played that way out,
He could have just
money was there. It was the wrong option.
Look,
50-50 for me.
If it hadn't been that, it would have been something else.
I know, I know. But it was...
How come, by the way, me and Alan always get these weeks? Right, they always get the fucking cup finals and the 3-2.
We've changed.
We've changed.
No, David, 6 months ago, mind we get one good week, didn't we? Where we won a couple of things, didn't we?
That. 15 episodes ago, me and Marlon had a win once.
And John and Andy complained, and then Martyn just shuffled things, didn't he? Yeah.
It'll be back by the time Gascoigne comes. You'll have the Gascoigne, you'll have the Loudrup final. I can promise you that.
Oh well, there you go. Right. That's a deal then. But look, I think we got what we deserved. We didn't deserve a treble.
No, we that team.
Yeah.
Despite Smith's pride, and I understand where he comes from. Again, I think he's very protective, and that's why he was such a huge man manager.
Correct,
yeah. But that was not a treble. The season before was a treble winning team, and the other treble winning teams I've seen from Rangers have been absolutely. You know what I mean? They've absolutely deserved it. Until Saturday, Rangers were threatened more by their own peculiar lethargy than anything their opponents could do. No one took advantage. No one could, because no one was capable, opined one columnist on the Monday morning. Frankly, I'm glad it's over. The longer it dragged on, the more damage was done to Scottish football's reputation. Not a bright and enjoyable season overall, despite this remarkable run of 8 domestic trophies in 10 since he took the job, one fabulous European run. Smith was under no illusions about the level of criticism that would come his way after just one defeat. Maybe that juxtaposition of watching AC Milan eviscerate Barcelona in the Champions League final just a few days before wouldn't have helped lighten that doubt that Rangers were a tired and blunt force. His side had failed to win any of the final 6 games and only 3 out of the last 12. The final gap was a 3-point advantage over Aberdeen, but no one had really truly convinced themselves of a title race, even with Rangers winning only half of that season's league fixtures. Smith knew that big action was required, and when he called for Andy Goram to meet him in his office, the Rangers goalkeeper knew he was in trouble. In truth, however, he had no idea just how much. So the team come back on the Monday for a kind of light warm down training session, basically. Every one of them speaks to the manager. If it's a quick one, your target weight, what he wants you to do over the summer, it's down in the office downstairs. If you're in a bit of bother, you go up.
You're down to co-winning at Davies.
You're up to the manager's office, up the stairs. And Goram talks about it in his book. He said that David Dawes came in the dressing room and said, "Goalie wants you now up the stairs." And Smith put him on the transfer list, and Goram thought he was just at it, and he said, "Andy, your chance is gone. That's it. I wish you all the best, but I won't be backing down in this. Good luck." Now, Goram had come back, but he'd broken down at the start of April. There was still hope that he would make the final, although Goram knew that was never happening. His back actually was in agony. And despite Smith being increasingly concerned about the impact of Goram's lifestyle on his recovery, that was really it. Smith was increasingly pissed off that Goram's off-field antics were hampering what should have happened physically, what they expected in terms of his physical recovery. Despite knowing this, he said, "Look, get yourself away. Take the family away somewhere nice." This was the run up to the final, coming up to the end of the season. So we went with his wife and I think his in-laws, brother, sister-in-law, whatever. They went to Tenerife for a week. And on the great week, everything that he said he felt he needed. On the final day, he bumped into Joe Royal and his Oldham teammates. He used to play for Oldham, of course. And 1 pint, that's fine. It turns to 5 and it turns to night out.
I know the feeling.
His wife and everyone leaving without him. I think he had about 40 quid to his name. And because of some flight issues, not quite the same as now with budget airlines or whatever, he was stuck there for another week. In which time he had broken the cheekbone of a Dundee United fan who was taunting him about the end of his career. The media got hold of that, and all these flashbulbs awaited Goram's eventual arrival back in Glasgow. Not what Smith needed in the run-up to that final. So he was to pay the price alongside Gary Stevens, Peter Houstra, Oleg Kuznetsov, Wishart, amongst others, as Smith made known his transfer list the week following the final. Goram was in tears, a broken man. His life appeared to be spiralling out of control. The Friday after the Cup final, Abbey National Building Society announced that they had started court proceedings against Goram for mortgage arrears. He begged for another chance. Smith wouldn't entertain it. And, Smith said, "Look, it's a regrettable decision, but I've got no other choice." We had disagreements about how he should handle his training after coming back from injury. Dave 8, his first signing, and one that had been remarkable was now on the transfer list. You expect that after the final, we've gone home and it's disappointing, blah, blah, blah. And you expect that just to be shut. We've got a World Cup to look forward to and who Rangers going to sign. No one was expecting that.
No one was. There's a couple of interesting things here about this. I had a meeting once at Ibrox, and by the way, I can sympathise with Goram because I always knew with Murray how much bother I was in based on where the meeting was. Blue Room, fine, didn't need to worry, probably got a bite to eat. Manager's office at Ibrox, not a bit bother. Charlotte Square, shit. So yeah, the venue thing runs through Ibrox. But I had a meeting with Walt Smith, and I asked him actually. I said, look, can you answer a few questions, fanboy thing? And I asked him. I said, would you, was that just good management? And he went, no, I was raging. He said he was going. And this was no long after, the Alan McGregor, Barry Ferguson thing.
Yeah.
And
no one came in for him, Davey. If someone had come in for him, he would have gone.
Yeah, he would have gone. And he spoke about the parallels with that. And Murray actually said to me, he said the difference was I'd told Barry after the Paul Le Guen thing, one more
last chance, yeah.
And if this ever happens again, you are gone. So it was Murray who was McGregor could get back in, but there was, even if Walter had, and he said even if I wanted to bring to bring Barry back, I couldn't because he wouldn't wear it. But he said no, he would have gone. But as you say, nobody come in for him. Again, my own personal situation. People don't know I'm a recovered alcoholic. I know that. No, but and I'll say this for Andy Goram, he did not go out that day and went, I know I'll fuck up my life. That's what I'll do. That is not the way your decision making. But you go to the pub and you have one, right? And then unfortunately, the reason alcoholics can't drink is as soon as you have one, your thinking changes and you're no longer in command of it anymore. And one becomes 5, becomes 7, becomes the next day, becomes 3 days later. I kind of sympathy. No, you're right. It's you should know better, and you're the only person that can control it. And anyone who's got no experience of addiction, then I totally get where you're coming from, and you're right. But he doesn't go out there that day and say, "Yeah, fuck him." Right? I'm just going to do what I want. But it's a disaster. It's an absolute disaster. And I was heartbroken. But again, this is the power that Walter Smith had. It didn't matter who the player was. If Walter said he was going, then he was going. And as much as I loved Andy Goram, it was kind of clear because you couldn't watch all those stories and think he's a poor hard done to victim because you didn't feel it. But I think that the reason that Walter was so, because as you say, Martyn, he's in tears, he's on his knees begging him literally in the state, please don't do this to me. It's very emotional, and the reason that Walter was so cold with him was not this, as has been put forward afterwards, that it was just a brilliant bit of management to shock him into life. He was raging. He felt personally let down, and the worst thing you could do with Walter Smith was make him feel that way. If he felt that he'd asked you to do something and you'd given him your word you were going to do it and you didn't do it, that was a crime worse than dropping a ball into the net or getting a red card in a game. It was, I think it ate at the bond of trust that he had with his players, and the fact that we've spoken before on this show about how me and you heard Davy Robertson at Narsa in 2022 talking about this, where he said, the thing with Walter is he always said to all the boys when he signed, if you look after me, I'll look after you. And I think that Goram had breached that covenant, and it's a pretty heavy covenant. And I think that once you'd done it, Walter wasn't a big one for daft boyness when a guy got to a certain age, incidentally. Walter wouldn't just write things off with boys will be boys. I think he was quite prepared if you kept it under control, but Goram was out of control. He was in a terrible state. He was a physical wreck. He was a mess. He was severe alcohol problems at this point, and he was very fortunate that I think that reputation, and also the fact there was a lot of whispers, remember guys, about he's done, like he can't come back even if even if Walter had him, that Rangers are basically trying to get him off their hands. Had there been a manager that was utterly desperate that summer and didn't buy those rumours, he would have been gone, and then God knows what would have happened with his career. But in the end, he was very, very fortunate to get that second chance.
I think to give Walter his due as well, David, that difference between management and leadership, and I think what you said, Walter was definitely that whole kind of leader, wasn't he? And as you say, would back them to the absolute hilt, but as long as they play fair with him too. And I think that's why so many would have ran through walls for him and so on, yeah.
Yeah, and look, see, in the end, it was, it was.
So they would understand, if he suddenly said, that's it, he's crossed it, the rest of the guys wouldn't go, oh, Walter's going out, because you'll know it's, my goodness, they must really have pushed. Do you know what I mean?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's, I think, what we all felt. I mean, you boys were about at the time, and the listeners, but I think we all felt, Jesus, it must be bad, to do this, because we'd all seen Ali Maxwell.
Aye.
If Walter was prepared to be stuck with him at this point, I think we all assumed we would sign a top level goalkeeper. We would have had to, but it's very difficult given Andy's sad passing.
Yes,
it's very difficult to be critical of someone, and a lot easier to remember the amount of utter joy that the man gave us. But at this stage, as a professional footballer, and I have a lot of sympathy, because, as I say, there are reasons that doesn't matter what your career is, by the way. Alcoholism doesn't care. It doesn't care if you're a goalkeeper at Rangers or an astronaut. It doesn't care, and it will get you. I just, you couldn't look at it and not say that as a professional athlete, he was not anywhere near the required standard. But again, I felt that I'd been dragged into that kind of Souness Butcher, Souness Roberts style row, where it's like my parents are fighting, That's kind of how it felt.
I just always saw Walter as, well, obviously Joe Wallace before and Greg, but Walter, it was just like our father, with the kind of Rangers come family, so... but I think Andy Goram as well, he would have held his hands up at times as well. I know, and do you get what I mean? So I don't think he would have been like in denial, wouldn't he? He would have, but it's far more complicated, David. Yeah.
No, nobody likes to hear, especially in Scotland, especially in a dressing room where it's a very macho drinking culture, nobody likes to hear, I can't handle my booze.
Yeah.
That it's almost because you begin to define yourself by your heroic intake of alcohol. You begin to say to yourself, I can do that, and I can get up and go to my work the next day. And you can do it right up until you can't.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing. You can do it right up until you can't, but you certainly, we talk about functional alcoholism, and I could get by. I worked in an office, right? I couldn't have, if I'd needed to get out of my bed every morning and perform that incredibly high level aerobic exercise, then I can assure you I would have struggled really badly to do that. And it wasn't just the drink. I mean, the drink is the main factor, but there's food. He was overeating. He was eating shite.
So it's a message. It's a message as well to the other players, because if they're going, hold on a wee minute, it was like even going way back to the Baxter one. Some of the other ones are going, oh, aye, he's doing this, that, the other.
Absolutely.
Do you know what I mean?
How do you have any authority with other players if they can, as you say, turn around and go, what about that then? And there is a point where it crosses. Gaza would get the same. There's a point where you kind of do get the extra leeway, because one, you're a likeable guy. They all love Goram, they all love Gascoigne. And two, there's a bit of sympathy, because they can see that, there's more to it than just he likes a bevy. But then there does come a point where you just cannot, as a manager, justify this anymore. And you have to make a decision. And look, he was in a position of strength, Walter. He knew he could do this and have certainly the backing of the owner, which he did get 100%. He knew that the fans would, probably end up agreeing if a replacement was bought. And I think he knew there was some anger about, because again, Murray controlled the media really well. So they got out the message of he didn't work hard enough to get fit. So given that a lot of fans are blaming this Diddy in goals, as we saw him, for costing us the cup final, then it's very easy to spin round and go, and it's your fault and all, because you should have been there, and if you'd been there, we'd have won the cup. So
this wasn't Souness Roberts, to be honest. People, obviously Rangers fans loved the Goram, but they their patience was starting to wear thin as well for the reasons you mentioned, because it wasn't an unlucky injury. People knew why the recovery was such a shambles that it was. But there was a message as we wrap up 93-94. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Very interesting discussion. I hope that the people listening enjoyed it as well.
Hope they did. I'm sure they did. Thank you, Alan.
Yeah, thanks, Martyn. As I say, maybe it wasn't enjoyable, but going through, we've got to do the warts and all, haven't we? So we can't just do all the... So I think it was important to just put a bit more light on this particular season.
Yeah. No, sometimes these are the most interesting parts. I promise the next time you're on in 2 weeks, there will be at least one special game to enjoy. But that's it for 93-94. And by the time that Richard Gough lifted that Premier Division trophy on that final home game against Dundee, it was clear that the title was beginning to feel a lot like Easter for Rangers fans. We weren't quite sure which date in the spring it was taking place, but they knew that it definitely would. A4 sheets of cardboard were left on every seat with a 6 on it to hold up at the presentation. It wasn't a tifo, it didn't combine in anything. They were just all these individual 6s. They didn't really look that effective. Thousands were turned upside down to make a 9, the real objective now. And many fans felt like this was a kind of banal waiting room for that season to come, going through the motions of picking up the necessary titles in the meantime. Truthfully, it really was becoming boring, and Smith saw drastic action as the only way to reinvigorate the whole project. But it was one thing telling the world who he thought was no longer required, and another replacing them with the kind of players who would reintroduce some colour to an increasingly grey backdrop of Scottish football. Fans had been discussing this very topic for months, and back in February, one cantankerous contributor to Follow, the Major, suggested the usual Scottish names, such as Alan McLaren, Ian Jess and Gary McAllister, before writing, "Looking further afield, I note with great interest that AC Milan are selling Brian Laudrup, who I think could be a sensation at Ibrox." Now then, there was a thought. Until next time, bye for now.